The death of the former apartheid Minister of Police, Adriaan Vlok, has sparked debates on the role he played as chief of the South African police. Vlok died on Sunday, and a lot has been said about him on our program. So tonight, let's see him through the eyes of a prominent newspaper editor at the time, veteran journalist and author Max du Preez, and advocate Mahlodi Muofe, who is the former State Security Agency Domestic Branch Director. To the pair of you, thank you very much for making the time to join us tonight. Appreciate it. So we struggle sometimes in our country with feet washing and forgiveness to call evil by its name. But Vlok was the law and order minister in South Africa at a time of a particularly insidious brand of repression and brutality between 86 and 91. Under his watch, police were allowed to break the law and effectively do whatever it took to crush the resistance. Advocate Muofe, what are your recollections of Adriaan Vlok at that time?
Well, my recollections really are sad memories because I was a youth at the time when he was the minister who authored basically the death of some of my ilk at the time. But I must also say that in time, taking into account that we had journalists like Max du Preez, but more than anybody else, Dr. Agrit Laste, who is late, may he so rest in peace, who couched up the concept of Ubuntu, which over a period of time got us to a healing period. But in all fairness, Adriaan Vlok loved seeing young people, activists fighting for the freedom of this country dead. And his police officers at the time were brutal and ruthless.
Yeah. Advocate Muofe, we're going to, during the course of this discussion, talk about those complexities and arrive at the end at this picture of Adriaan Vlok towards the end of his life. But Max, you were the editor-in-chief of the Vrye Weekblad during some of the most tumultuous years in South Africa. You are one of those significantly placed to weigh in on the spectre of terror that the state security branch cast over the country and the media. If I'm recalling your experiences correctly, sentenced to 6 months in jail for even quoting Joe Slover in a report. He was then the leader of the SABC. Vlok was, of course, the enforcer of the National Party government. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, bombing your office once. You've been taken to court by him several times. What are your recollections of 1986 to 1991, Vlok?
Iman, we must remember that the apartheid regime was different from other dictatorships and oppressive regimes. They played according to the law, so they made racist laws and legally oppressed people according to their own laws. And this changed under the total onslaught doctrine. And Vlok was in charge of policing then. So he allowed his police, or he directed his police, to work outside of the law. So torture, kidnapping, poisoning, assassination became legal. And that's the reign we saw in the late 80s. Adriaan Vlok was a particularly evil man at that point. He not only targeted me, I'm still here and alive, a lot of other people that he had targeted are not alive to speak to you tonight. So I remember two Adriaan Vloks. I remember that Adriaan Vlok. And I remember the small, humble man who came to my door in 2019 to ask my forgiveness and to ask if he could wash my feet.
Max, I want you to take a breath on that recollection, because it's significant that we come back to it, because I want you to tease out exactly what that felt like and whether you really believed in the contrition that he was seeking or the forgiveness that he was seeking from you. Quickly turn this to Advocate Muofe. There are reports from the time, not only journalists like Max, but others, you know, of Adriaan Vlok at the scene, for example, of the bombing of Kasatu House, peddling disinformation that the ANC was responsible. There are recollections that he was this smiling and silent assassin by proxy, so to speak, doggedly carrying out his mandate to bring any dissent to its knees and to undermine liberation forces inside the country. Can you share from your vantage point what set him apart from his predecessor, Louis Legrandzi? Advocate Muofe?
Well, I guess they were birds of the same feather insofar as I'm concerned. During that period, we were basically subjected to all sorts of brutal treatment by the apartheid security systems. And to me, they don't really want to make any difference. They just wanted to ensure that the reign of the apartheid system kept on going at the cost of killing black activists, and I mean Africans, and also journalists like Preez and many others who were subjected to all sorts of torture. It was really bad, Imani. I remember at some point when I was detained at John Foster Square as an 18-year-old kid, when they took me out of the window, 10th floor, and they wanted to throw me out. They were brutal, to say anything. There isn't much that one can say. But one lasting memory for me was that, Iman, I've worked in many different departments in government. I would then join the Department of Correctional Services, and one of my former colleagues there was actually Adriaan Vlok's chief of staff. And you can imagine how I felt when I got to know at that time that he was Adriaan Vlok's chief of staff. But in time, we went on very well. And I can still say that we do get in touch now and then with the said official. But those were real bad times. And Adriaan Vlok in particular were brutal and ruthless.
This is what's so interesting, Max, as I bring it back to you and that story you were about to tell us, is just the dimensionality of life in a country like South Africa, which requires, a deep dipping into the well of forgiveness to really overcome and in a sense, kind of wash the trauma and the torture of the past. But you share with us this picture of Adriaan Vlok, a wizened figure, wanting your forgiveness for what he had done to you, sitting at your feet in your home in Constantia and washing them. Relive that moment again and whether you saw deep and sincere contrition in his eyes.
Yeah, I first confronted him at the Truth Commission. You may remember that I was in charge of television coverage of the SABC of the Truth Commission process. So when he appeared before the Truth Commission, I confronted him for the first time. And he was sort of half contrite. He wasn't as arrogant as before. But then I said to him, Mr. Vlok, do you remember that you traveled to Vlokplaas and you stuck medals on Eugene de Kock's chest? So that was the one moment. And then the next time I saw him was when he entered my home in 2019. And he was this small guy, I couldn't recognize him. And he came and he said he had become a Christian, and he quoted from the Bible why apartheid was evil. And he said he needed to speak to all his victims and wash their feet and ask their forgiveness. And I was kind of, what do you do? The older guy. And I said, ja, oom, jy kan maar maak soos jy moet. But in the end, Iman, I must tell you, he was mocked very severely by his own people for doing this washing Frank Shikane's feet and other people's feet and sort of humbling himself. And he persisted. He gave up his home in Centurion to homeless black people. He spent his entire pension buying food for children in Olivenboschfontein. And so who am I to say, I mean, I listened to Frank Chikane, a man who I admire, who said, it was Adrian's ministry, I forgive him. Who am I to say I doubt him? Because he persisted, and he didn't only walk the walk, talk the talk, he walked the walk. So I think I needed to say, I recognize the potential for anybody to truly change their heart and their mind.
Yeah, and Max, thank you, for sharing so honestly, because it is a difficult thing, and it's almost an organic thing. I mean, we've been reading so much commentary by people we respect in South Africa, historians and others who say, remembering him with any, a modicum of fondness is to rub salt in the wounds of those families who don't have closure even today on the activities, both at Vloks and others under Adriaan Vlok's stewardship. Pardon me. So thank you very much for sharing and for, again, just, making that focus on the nuance and the dimensionality of this. But it does lead to the question, Advocate Muofe, and you touched on it a little bit, about where we place such people who pledge their lives to others in the end. They have all the accoutrement of remorse. How, best could Vlok have expressed his turnaround more than he did, as Max just said, sharing his resources with the poorest, living the simple life at the end, and yet there's so much pain, so much blood, so many unanswered questions.
Imani, for me it would have made sense had he repented at the time when he was still in power. Trying to repent post the apartheid era, I guess, was more to save his own skin. Many young people passed away as a result of Adriaan Vlok's draconian rules, and washing this one or that one's feet. I guess it was just a sign of trying to make up for the many deaths he caused. Because the apartheid government basically, ruled us using the Bible as well. I mean, he was a Christian even at the time when he was killing us anyway. But in reality is that in us, there is humanness. We will always forgive, but we would never forget the many young people, or brothers and sisters, who perished at that time. Their parents died lonely deaths, some of them without even knowing how their children were killed by Adriaan Vlok.
We'll leave it on that note. It certainly is a moment for us to reflect on the past, the direction in which South Africa has gone, and how we come to terms with some of these living, sort of living vestiges of our past, and in their demise, how do we recall them? Max, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. Advocate Muofe, to you as well. Really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you so much, Iman.